Right, diving right in today. We're tackling a really big issue for folks in rural South Africa, and that is Veldfire management and all the legal stuff that comes with it.
Right.
Now, yeah, you sent over some pretty intense info showing just how much these fires cost, like millions, and the impact they have on people's lives.
Yeah.
So our mission, if you will, is to break this all down for landowners out there.
Yeah.
And figure out how to handle those risks proactively, focusing specifically on fire protection associations, the FPAs.
Yes.
And of course, what exactly negligence means when it comes to all of this.
Okay, well, first off, what's really interesting is that we have this framework thanks to the National Veldt and Forest Fire Act, the NVFFA.
Okay.
And this act actually allows for, these FPAs to be created.
Right.
So think of them like cooperatives, right? But with legal recognition, where landowners basically team up, pool their resources and their knowledge to really combat these fires head on much more effectively. And they're statutory bodies too, meaning they're established and recognized under the law, which gives them real power when it comes to fire management.
Ah, so it's not just like a friendly neighborhood group. They actually have some teeth to them.
Exactly. Yeah, they have the authority.
Okay, so for a real world example, you mentioned the Northeastern Free State Fire Protection Association.
Yes, the NEFSFPA.
NEFSFPA. Yeah, tell me a bit more about them.
Right. So this is a great example of a larger FPA that was actually formed by a bunch of smaller ones coming together.
Oh.
They operate under the NVFFA framework, of course, and they even have a seat at the table on the Free State Fire Advisory Forum.
Wow.
So their members' voices are actually being heard at a much higher level.
That's great. So they have some sway, some pull up there.
Definitely. And if we connect this back to, what a landowner might be dealing with, the NEFSFPA really provides this comprehensive risk management plan. So instead of each landowner having to go it alone, figure everything out themselves.
Right.
Membership gives you things like coordinated responses to fires, administrative support, which, let's be honest, nobody wants to deal with all that paperwork.
Yeah, absolutely.
And of course, perhaps most importantly, crucial weather information so you can stay ahead of the game.
Oh, I see. So it's almost like a ready-made support system then.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. So what kind of specific things are we talking about here? Is it like standby teams or something like that?
Oh, absolutely. So they have standby teams ready to go, access to working on fire, help with preliminary investigations, and they even have their own weather stations that keep members updated on the Fire Danger Index, the FDI.
Okay. Well, that's very practical. Very, very helpful.
Right. So being a part of a larger FPA like this really puts you in a much stronger position when it comes to managing these threats.
Now, you touched on something earlier that I wanted to get back to, this legal advantage of joining an FPA.
Oh.
So what exactly is that all about?
Okay. So while individual efforts are definitely important and valuable.
Sure.
Joining an FPA, which is something that a lot of agricultural organizations and even insurers strongly encourage these days, can actually remove what's called the presumption of negligence.
Okay.
This applies if a fire starts on your property and it spreads and causes damage to someone else.
Right.
So it's a significant legal protection to have.
I'm still a little fuzzy on exactly how that works. So
okay. Sure.
So if I'm not in an FPA,
right,
and a fire starts on my land, spreads, causes damage, the law basically assumes I messed up.
Exactly. They presume you are negligent unless you can prove otherwise, which can be really difficult.
Oh, I see.
But if you're an FPA member, the person who's claiming those damages, they actually have to prove that you are negligent.
Okay, so it shifts the burden of proof.
Exactly. Huge difference in legal protection.
Yeah. That makes a lot more sense now. So it's not just about resources and support. It's also about protecting yourself legally.
Absolutely.
Okay, so aside from that big one, are there any other advantages to joining an FPA?
Oh, definitely, yeah.
Like what?
So, for example, FPAs can sometimes help you get exemptions on certain fire prevention measures.
Okay.
Things that you might otherwise be required to do as an individual landowner.
Right.
And access to resources like those. Working on fire teams often comes at a reduced cost if you're part of an FPA.
Oh, okay. So there are some financial benefits as well.
Exactly. And plus you have this localized organization. You're working with people in your area who understand the specific challenges.
Yeah.
And the fire protection officers, they have certain enforcement powers that can really help make fire prevention and response more effective.
Okay. So So joining an FPA really sounds like it's not just about putting out fires. It's about this whole approach to managing the risk, having the resources, and like you said, having that legal protection.
Exactly. Yeah.
You also mentioned in your notes here that they offer things like training programs, advice on equipment.
Yes.
And help coordinating with provincial resources. So it's really quite comprehensive.
It is. It's very comprehensive.
Okay. So now let's switch gears a little bit and talk about this whole idea of negligence from a legal standpoint. You mentioned South African law, duty of care, all that.
Right. So let's break that down a little bit.
Okay.
So negligence, in general terms, under South African law, it basically involves what's called a duty of care.
Okay.
And this basically means, what should a reasonable landowner do, to prevent harm? What are the steps they should be taking?
Right.
And if there is a breach of that duty, and then there's a direct link between that breach and the damage caused by the fire, and then, of course, the actual damages that were suffered, all of these elements are considered when determining negligence.
So for someone listening who owns land in a fire-prone area, what would that duty of care actually look like? What were some specific things?
Right. So some key things would be maintaining those fire breaks.
Okay.
Making sure you have basic firefighting equipment, and this doesn't have to be anything super fancy, but the basics.
Right.
Having some trained personnel on hand.
Okay.
Acting quickly to extinguish any fires that do start, and informing the authorities and your neighbors about any potential risks.
Okay.
And a really important one is managing the vegetation that could potentially fuel a fire.
Right. So clearing brush and things like that.
Exactly. Yeah. All part of that responsibility.
Okay. So now you also mentioned this term, delict. Is that how you say it?
Yes, delict, yeah.
Delict, and that's basically like a legal term for wrongdoing.
It is, yeah. Think of it as a civil wrong that causes harm. And to prove a delict in a fire situation, you basically need to show a few things.
Okay.
You need to show conduct, which could also include a failure to act, not doing something you should have.
Right.
You need to show that this conduct was wrongful, meaning it infringed on somebody's rights or went against some kind of legal duty.
Okay.
You need to prove negligence, which means acting without reasonable care, taking into account things like foreseeability and preventability. You need to establish causation, meaning a direct link between that negligence and the fire that caused the harm.
Okay.
And then lastly, you have to show the actual damage occurred as a result of the fire.
Okay, well that's quite a list to prove.
It is, but it's important to understand all the elements.
Right, and this brings us back to Section 34 of the NEFSFPA that we talked about earlier.
Yes.
So just to remind everybody, this section basically says that if someone suffers a loss because of a fire that started on your property or spread from your property, you're automatically assumed to be negligent unless you're a member of an FPA.
Exactly. That presumption of negligence is a big deal.
It is. It really incentivizes joining those organizations.
Definitely.
Okay, now I know you also had some really interesting legal cases to share with us and how they relate to all of this.
Yeah, I do.
Just to illustrate these concepts a little bit better. So tell me about those.
Sure. So one case that really clarifies things is Gada Bordery versus Transnet.
Okay.
And this one basically established that this presumption of negligence that we've been talking about, it only applies if the fire is what's considered a Veldfire right from the start.
Okay, and what does that mean exactly?
So it has to originate on unenclosed land with natural vegetation.
I see.
And in this case, the fire actually started on a railway line, which the court said wasn't considered Veld.
Oh, interesting. So the law really gets into the specifics of where the fire begins.
It does, yeah. The location matters.
Okay, what other cases did you want to highlight?
Right. So another one that's important is Nuku Properties versus Inkululeko Community Trust.
Okay.
And this one established that this whole idea of owner can actually include both the registered landowner and a tenant who has control of the property.
Oh, interesting.
So both parties can bear the responsibility, when it comes to fire prevention and all of that.
So it's not just about who's on the deed. It's about who's actually responsible for managing the land.
Exactly. Yeah, that's a crucial point.
Okay. Now you had one more case, I think.
Right. Yeah. So MTO Forestry versus Swart.
Okay.
This one highlighted that landowners, they do have a duty to take reasonable steps to prevent fires from spreading. But it's not an absolute duty, meaning they don't have to do absolutely everything humanly possible to stop it. The court recognized that severe weather conditions, things outside of the landowner's control, can be a factor in assessing whether or not they were actually negligent.
So it's not a black and white issue. It's very contextual.
Exactly. The circumstances matter.
Okay. And then the last one, Geo Parks and Son.
Yes. Geo Parks and Son versus Meter.
Versus Meter. Okay.
And this one basically showed that landowners can be held liable not only for their own negligence, but also for the negligent actions of others on their property.
Oh, wow.
Like if they fail to take those necessary precautions, especially during those high risk periods.
So if I, hire someone to do some work on my property, and they're careless, and a fire starts, I could still be held liable?
You could, yeah, if you didn't take the right steps to prevent it.
Wow. Okay, so it really emphasizes the importance of oversight and making sure everyone on your property is following the rules.
Absolutely. Due diligence is key.
Okay, now before we wrap things up, I do want to just touch on the NVFFA itself.
Okay.
Specifically some of the key sections that relate to all of this.
Sure.
Just to give people a very clear understanding of what they need to know.
Absolutely. So to start, we have sections 12 and 13, which outline the requirements for those fire breaks.
Okay, the breaks between property.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Then we have section 17.1, which mandates having that firefighting equipment and trained personnel that we talked about earlier.
Okay.
And section 18, which deals with the duty to notify the authorities and your neighbors if there's a fire risk.
Right. So communication is really important.
It is. Very important.
Okay.
And then we have section 25, which lists the offenses and penalties that you could face if you're found negligent in relation to a fire.
Okay, so there are real consequences.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah.
And then of course we have section 34, which, as we've discussed, contains that crucial presumption regarding FPA members.
Right. So that's the one where if you're a member, you're not automatically assumed to be negligent.
Exactly.
Okay, so to bring it all home, what are the key takeaways here for landowners?
Okay, well, the big one is that FPA membership and sticking to the rules of the National Veld and Forest Fire Act, those are your best weapons when it comes to managing the risk of Veldfire.
Okay.
And navigating all the potential legal issues that can come with it.
Right.
So to break it down, joining an FPA, understanding the NVFFA and following its rules, actively managing the fuel load on your property, staying informed about fire danger, having a clear fire management strategy in place, training your staff, and of course, maintaining good insurance. All of these are vital steps.
So it's really about being proactive, being prepared.
Absolutely, yeah.
And knowing what your responsibilities are.
Exactly.
Yeah, well, this has been really, really informative. I think we covered a lot of ground here.
We did.
And hopefully this gives landowners a good starting point to really think about how they're managing these risks. All right, well, thanks for joining me today. This has been a really great deep dive into a very important topic.
It's been a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
All right. That's it for the deep dive. We'll see you next time.